It's time to talk stewardship again. Lorie and I are ready to go, and we hope you are too.
When I've heard you talk about stewardship, you always emphasize that everything we have comes from God, belongs to God, always will belong to God, and our job is really to use those resources that have been entrusted to us. How do congregations typically approach that discerning process about how they're going to use their resources?
Congregations have never been brought to the idea that they respond to what God has already done. They're usually asked to respond to what do you think we need. And so they're very reluctant to start thinking differently. And the slowest part is saying, let's relearn, because relearning or unlearning is very difficult.
So we're really used to sort of a budget-driven syndrome where people are giving to meet a budget or to meet a deficit or even to, fund a certain project. So what happens when we use that approach?
Usually, and lately we've been seeing it, the response gets less and less and less. People are getting a bit tired of propping up an organization that appears, as an organization, to be diminishing.
Well, what would be a more faithful response to stewardship?
I think we have to recognize, as I've said right from the beginning, if we recognize it all belongs to God, we have to start saying, how am I responding? Or how are we as a faith community responding to the reality that it all belongs to God already? How do we recognize that what we have is entrusted? And how can we be faithful to that?
And why is that more exciting to people?
Well, people start to recognize that that's really what the church is all about.
Now, in a congregation, who typically sets the vision or the direction for the church?
Very often, the priest says, I have a vision for the next year or 10 years or whatever. The other one is to say, the parish council's been talking about this, and we have this vision for the parish.
And what happens when it's that small core of people that sets the vision?
Two responses. The old faithful say, okay, we'll go along with it. More and more people are saying, hey, who said that's the vision for this parish? Why is it? Who decided that? Well, it's not my vision.
I go to what we call a family-sized church, and it seems that it's the same small core of people that are always left to do the leadership roles, and a lot of people that attend on Sunday, but that aren't actually that engaged. And so it invariably falls to that small core of people to set the vision. So how do you get more people involved?
For the most part, we've never engaged them. We've never said to the people of the congregation, what do you believe the vision is? We usually say, this is what the vision is. I'll give you an example. A long time ago, I came out of the cathedral in Prince Rupert. I'd just been elected bishop. And there was a CBC reporter and a microphone, and he came over to me and he said, tell me what your vision is for the diocese. And I said, I have no idea. And he turned his microphone off and went back to his truck. Because I hadn't any idea. And it took a long time to go through that diocese to find out what the vision was.
And do you find when you do ask people what their dreams are, what their visions are, when they do have that opportunity to dream with you, that it does happen, that people have ideas?
You'd be amused, because people say, oh yeah, that's great. Then when they sit down and begin to talk, they start saying, why don't we do this? Why can't we do this? Or I'd like to do that. Or what did we do last year? And over again, you have to say, no, that's not the question. For once, we're saying, what do we believe God is calling us to do? Now let's focus on that question. What do you believe? You may be wrong. You may have no idea, but what do you think God is calling us to do? And I find people, first of all, very nervously start to hint at ideas, and more they're involved in that kind of process, they start to get excited that, hey, this is possible. And they come together with their friends and they talk about, maybe God is calling us to do this, maybe God is calling us to do that. I find that then people start to get excited, and that's stewardship. And to get people excited about stewardship is a novelty.
And do you think that when you're having those kind of discussions, you can really see God's presence in those discussions?
I am convinced God is present. And so I trust that when we're together, we're asking that simple question. We're all engaged in this. I believe what emerges must have something to do with what God wants us to do.
I guess that's what I was kind of wondering, is when we're faithful in our response, that God honors that faithfulness and is in that process.
If we can honestly say, I believe this is what God's calling us to do, then we step forward, and if we're wrong, we're wrong. We're allowed to be wrong. What we are not allowed to be is unfaithful to what we believe God is calling us to do. We can't simply say, this is what God's calling us to do, but we don't care.
Now, do you find in congregations, if it is sort of the priest and parish council, or that small core of leaders that has always made the decisions, is it sometimes hard for that small group to give up control of that?
Yeah, there are two responses to this. The first thing is I don't want to blame the clergy and the parish council, because 9 times out of 10, nobody else wants to take over. So the parish council and the clergy like to do it because they know it's got to be done. Many people in the congregation like it to be done, but really don't always approve of what's being done. So you've got two groups. They're playing one against the other, so that you end up with a group of people saying, okay, we'll run the show, and we'll tell you what's going to happen. And the people grumble, but they either follow or they don't. And when you start to get more people excited about it, parish councils discover that they are liberated, that they are not diminished, that they are liberated from worrying about all sorts of things, to lead the people of God in the way God is calling them. And that's even exciting for clergy and parish councils.
And so in your approach, you suggest small group meetings for that within the church. Yeah. And why does it work better in small groups rather than the whole parish gathers for a visioning group?
Well, the bigger the group, the more people can hide, and the more vocal people speak more than they need to. So you get a small group. I mean, I personally work with triads, 3 people in a group. Nobody can hide. Nobody's scared of the other 2. Nobody becomes a dominant speaker. Nobody can sit silently. And so you get a small group, and you set the tone, and you set the, if you like, the agenda, the parameters, and turn them loose. And I find all sorts of exciting things happen because they're free to say things. They're usually with people they know, and they're not threatened by anybody, and it works.
And what are those parameters? What are the questions that you're asking in those little groups?
What do you believe God is calling the faith community to do? And that's the only question. And as soon as they say, well, I think, no, you don't think. Let's talk about what you believe God is calling us to do. Well, I'd like to do, no, you wouldn't like to do that. This is what God is calling us. And this is what the church always does. This is what we did last year. This is what we've done every year. Now, these are not the questions. And that's calling them back to the one question. And they begin to talk, and you say, there's no debate. We're not going to argue with one another. And we gather together all sorts of ideas that people believe God is calling us to do. And eventually, I mean, some groups just flounder. I mean, some groups just spend the whole time criticizing the rector, and nothing a leader can do to change that. I believe God is calling us to get rid of the rector. You know, it's a bit difficult to deal with that.
How do I know the difference between just something I like and something I think is a great idea and something that I believe God is calling us to do?
I mean, I agree. I can be in a group like that and I say, I believe God is calling us to do this. Even unconsciously, it may be simply something that's a favorite idea of mine. But when it's together with, say, 8 or 10 other people's ideas, and they all come together and are sifted out, I believe that's when you discover the essential things that God is calling the faith community to do.
And how do you, just from a logistical point of view, so there's one leader that would come in and have the discussion with the small groups within the church?
Now, I would suggest you have a team, not a committee. A committee makes decisions. A team is a working group that visits the different sub-communities, I call them, within a parish or within a congregation. And 2 people go from the team, one simply to raise the question and to keep it moving and keep people on the question. And so you have this one person convening and facilitating the event and simply saying, there are no comments, we're not saying, well, that's a silly idea, or we can't afford it. That's a typical response. We can't afford to do that. That's not the issue. The other person is sort of listening and writing down, making notes so that nothing is missed. Every idea that comes up is recorded somewhere, and that person's responsibility. Say, don't spend more than 20 minutes in that group. Don't make it only 7 to 10, or it becomes a discussion of the value and merits of different ideas.
And what's the benefit of doing it in groups within the church that already have some common, so if it's the Altar Guild or the Men's Club or the ACW?
I mean, these people have got a specific concern in the life of the whole faith community, but they are members of the faith community. They're not separate. They're not separate entities. And so to say to the Altar Guild, for example, we know your main concern is around the altar, sanctuary, chancel kind of furnishings and all the other trimmings. We know that, but you are part of the faith community. Now, as a little community of your own, talk together. What do you think God is calling the whole faith community to do? And it may be that God is calling the whole faith community to provide you with new linens for the church. But we'll see. Sometimes I've heard people say, well, I think we should double the congregation in a year. Oh, yes, I'm sure you do. And you may believe God's calling us to do that. Write it down. We won't debate it.
And when people have shared their ideas, how are those ideas prioritized?
You may want to use these questions to start you off. What do we do about the ongoing parish needs and expenses if we don't talk about the budget? What are some of the challenges you're likely to face?